Hey, everybody. All right, we're back. So the first two sessions were focused on the application of new technologies and techniques to push geothermal forward. And the next two sessions are a little bit different. They are companies who are developing projects in the field. Both of them are sedimentary projects, which is was a really hot topic for us yesterday. And they've both been in the field over the last year and have some new data to share with us about what they're finding. So without further ado, I'll introduce Kirsten Marcia with Deep Earth Energy, and we'll be back for Q&A at the end of the session. Kirsten?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jamie, and to the rest of the team for inviting me to participate on this today. I'm excited to join this conference. Okay, so hello from Canada. We're talking about our Canadian project. As most of you are aware, we don't have any geothermal power production in Canada yet. We've been working very hard on our Williston Basin Sedimentary Geothermal project over the last few years, especially gotten very active at the end of 2018, where we were able to secure some government funding and the capital investment to get started. We are now on our way to complete the financial investment decision later this year, which will lead us into construction with our first Canadian electrons to the grid early in 2025. So this is a new industry for Canada. As we're all aware, geothermal is hard. It's extra hard when there's no peers in your sector here in Canada. But we're very proud to be very close to the finish line on this project. And we'll see the first 35 megawatts facility in just a couple of years. So we're a conventional geothermal project in that, we are producing hot geothermal fluids at approximately 120 degrees Celsius, which is 248 degrees Fahrenheit. We're producing all of the fluids out of a deep sedimentary reservoir, a sandstone. And all of that fluid will be injected back into that same sandstone for reheating. We're in the province of Saskatchewan. So geographically speaking, we're just above North Dakota and Montana and very close to the border. In fact, we named our wells the border wells because literally right on the border. In fact, one of our wells that we drilled, we actually had to go to a border gate, a border crossing, and then we drove the fence line. So like literally just feet away from where we drove the fence line, and then hang a right into the well lease. So, you wave to the border guard every morning when you go onto the lease. It was kind of fun. We've now drilled 6 wells. Our last well was drilled last year. 5 of those wells have been vertical or deviated wells. All of the wells have been the deepest ever drilled in the province of Saskatchewan at just over 3.5 kilometers depth, which is over 11,000 feet of depth. One of the wells was horizontal and of course tracked all along that 3,450 meter depth. That horizontal well that we drilled had a 2,000 meter horizontal section. So total drill pipe in the ground was 18,609 feet. So this was a big well for any standards, but it was drilled perfectly, and we were very pleased with the outcome of that. As a consequence of the successful drilling of that horizontal well, our full field design, all of the wells going forward will be drilled horizontally. We did do another test well last year, another vertical well, just again wanted to have a inexpensive, although still, several $1 million, an inexpensive test to test out a geological formation. We just want to make sure that what we were seeing on the seismic wasn't going to give us any surprises. That was the Border 6 well. On this map here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's this well here was the last well that we drilled. The good news is it came on exactly as we predicted and no surprises. That's actually one of the great benefits to this particular project. Being that there's enormous lateral continuity in the geology, that we're able to now predict with great confidence what this reservoir can do, and I guess more importantly, what it cannot do, so that we were able to model its productivity over 25 years. Importantly, of course, for any reservoir engineering, we've completed an enormous amount of test work on these wells. One of the wells that was completed, we produced over 53 days. We produced enormous volumes and injected them into 2 nearby wells that we had already drilled. Of course, all of that data then was used into the reservoir modeling software to test the limits of this resource. The last well that we drilled last year, Border 6, it was also injection tested. It was a 1,500 cubes a day over 3 days, so 500 cubes. It performed fantastically, and everyone likes a surprise once in a while. In fact, it performed even a little better than we had predicted it was going to do. So a nice win there. So, of course, as a sedimentary resource, we spend an enormous amount of time understanding the geology and making sure that we can focus and be able to produce these fluids at the highest productivity rate possible. We've done a lot of coring. Our very first well that we drilled, we collected 192 meters of core. Our most recent well that we drilled last year, we only cored 80 meters because we're kind of focusing in. Every bit of information allows us to focus in closer and closer to where our confidence is in the resource, where we are very confident now. So we are focused now within this. If this is the cross section, you can see this is the Winnipeg Formation up here. The Deadwood Formation starts right at the top, and you can see through this diagram that there are layers. It's not just one solid sandstone package. And we're focused in this bottom zone here, which is we call it the Deadwood Main, for lack of a better term, but it consists of shoreline, shore face sediments, delta bars, channels, lagoon, and aeolian dunes. It's allowing for the best productivity that we're seeing. There is another package at the top here, another aeolian dune package that's discrete and separated by mudstones from the rest of this package down here. But this is our primary main zone. It's approximately 25 meters in total vertical thickness, and is very, very consistent. All the wells that we've drilled, we're seeing exactly the same formation repeated over and over and over again. In fact, it's interesting. This particular formation, of course, it tracks all the way into North Dakota and even South Dakota, where it outcrops near the town of Deadwood. And, we're able to see this same formation over and over again. So that lotto continuity is really a key factor in this resource, and it's our ability to be able to predict and have confidence in what its productivity will be, not just over a 53-day test, but of course, over the life of a power project. Our current power purchase agreement with our utility here in Saskatchewan, Sask Power, is a 25-year contract. So it's very important that we tie the reservoir to be able to perform over the life of that contract, as you can well imagine. The sandstone has approximately 10 to 16% porosity. The KH, so that the permeability, the average in the core, we're seeing about 25 millidarcies in the core. But interestingly enough, when we produce what we're seeing in the reservoir in the production test, we're actually seeing permeabilities a little higher than that. In fact, the KH on this could be as high as 1,000 in some of the productivity tests we're seeing. So very, very positive reservoir performance. Just give you an idea what our reservoir formation looks like. It is a sandstone. It's a fine to medium grained quartz arenite. You can see the varying angles of cross bedding. You can see the green color is coming from the pervasive glauconite in the core. we've spent an enormous amount of time reservoir modeling. And when I say time, I also mean millions of dollars, to be quite honest. Very important that we get the spacing right on this reservoir. So we've really spent a lot of time looking at the optimization of how many wells, the spacing of those wells, and the lateral distance of those wells. And so what we've landed on, what we're seeing here in these two diagrams is some of the outputs from the Petrel and Eclipse modeling work that we've done through Schlumberger software. You can see we've really tested this resource very carefully to see how it behaves on year 1 versus how it behaves on year 30, and when we're going to start seeing pressure and temperature breakthroughs. That's really, really important to us. Each of the wells now will be producing it. Will be the optimal field design now lands at 18 production wells and 16 injection wells. Spaced at 400 meters separation, and that's giving us the best optimal outputs. Total production in that field will be approximately 1,000 liters per second. So just the quick math, so 1,000 liters divided by 18 gives you about 55 liters per second per well on the production side, and a little bit more on the injection side. Just a visual schematic. We've used this before, but I think it's kind of as opposed to what the modeling software looks like, this is just a better visual of how this field is going to be developed. It's interesting because, as we drilled our vertical wells, we were of course looking for how can we have our highest productivity rate out of those wells. And it didn't take long for the oil and gas industry to tap us on the shoulder and say, you can keep drilling your vertical wells in that sandstone, but why don't you do what the oil and gas industry has been doing for decades and start drilling horizontally? Where we're located is in the heart of the Bakken oil field, where essentially every well is drilled horizontally. So this was a really great transfer of technology and know-how to be deployed on this renewable energy resource. We'll be drilling all of our wells horizontally, and I think it's a great demonstration, first of its kind in the world, to be drilling for-purpose horizontal wells for a geothermal powered field. Just another schematic of how this looks. Again, some of the drill down and some of the details of the production rates. Again, we mentioned about 1,000 liters per second, and that will produce 35 megawatts of power. So this is the optimal design that we've landed on. We believe it could be transformative, not just here in Canada, but of course in any sedimentary resource around the world, where we're dealing with, these are lower temperature even at 120 degrees Celsius. They're still, of course, on the lower spectrum for geothermal, and so that productivity, that fluid flow is really, really key. I often mention, at these lower temperatures, I've got a bit of a mining background, so it's like trying to develop, a low-grade mine. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to move a lot of fluid to produce those same megawatts of power, and so that's the real key in this. One of the challenges we've had in this project, and there have been several that we've had to accomplish and tackle. This has been active engineering and mitigation strategies all the way along, is that our brine is very, very saline. Total dissolved solids in our brine is 300 the TDS is 360,000, which essentially means that 36% of our brine is dissolved solids. So very, very saline. It has a density of 1.22. So when you have a bucket of this stuff, it's not water. This is heavy saline brine. So very important that we have corrosion mitigation in place. And we had hoped to be able to mitigate our corrosion using corrosion inhibitors. Unfortunately, it is just, this is like salton sea type of brine, far too difficult to mitigate just with that. So we've had to alter our well design to include corrosion protective tubing, basically a polymer coated tubing string, so that we're not seeing any corrosion in our carbon steel casing. The horizontal leg of the wells will be open hole. The casing tubing, just to give some context, is a very similar product. There's actually two manufacturing companies here in Alberta. here in Canada in the province of Alberta. And it's used in oil sands, so that the tubing, so it can take the temperature, it can take the abrasion, that's very important, and they will guarantee these products for several decades. So really key, again, this is a very unique well design. Again, we're not seeing this in other geothermal projects, but it's the key in making these projects last and not having any corrosion issues. These are big wells, of course, you know, so we're casing them at 9 5/8, and the inner tubing, the protective, the non-metallic coated tubing is 7 inches. You know, here we are in oil and gas country, in the Williston Basin, and you know, we really enjoy how every day, you know, we get to work, whether it's in the field when we're drilling or our team of professionals within Deep. Almost everyone is coming from the oil and gas industry. And so I think this is a really, really cool energy diversification project where, you know, we're developing our oil and gas resources right alongside of developing this clean baseload power project right alongside, and everyone can work together. Our oil and gas resources are above us and our geothermal resources are below, and both projects can work at the same time. Projects has been hard. The project has been expensive. That's the reality. We've raised about $25 million in private equity since the beginning of this project. Most of that investment has come from the oil and gas industry through high net worth individuals that understand what we're doing, and that we're really just an oil and gas company with no oil and gas cuts. We're just moving fluids in the Williston Basin. Of course, and we've been, you know, hugely supported by our Canadian federal government through Natural Resources Canada, which has now contributed over $28.5 million to this project. We're working hard up here in Canada, folks. We are getting very, very close to the finish line, and we're very, very thrilled to get this first project done and join this geothermal energy sector that the United States has been so aggressively leading over the years. Thank you. And that's the end of my slides.
Awesome, Kirsten. All right, so let's segue into the Q&A. And oh boy, Kirsten, you have some fans in the audience. So there are, you're a rock star. So there are a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to group them so we can get through as many as possible in our 15 minutes here. There's a theme about scale inhibitors, and your use of them, how much you need them, et cetera, et cetera. Can you address that, Kirsten?
Yeah, I'll address that. So we did some testing over the last starting in November of last year, where we did some, you know, desktop test work of our brine and a suite of on-the-shelf corrosion inhibitors to try to mitigate the scaling and corrosion. And yeah, long story short, there wasn't a product available today that could properly mitigate for that corrosion and inhibitor. So, which is what's driven us towards the special polymer tubing string to protect that well. Now, what that did, I mean, what that decision did for us is, once we took that 9 5, we had a 9 5/8 well, right? And if we weren't running tubing inside that string, we were producing at much higher rates. Once we had to put the corrosion resistant polymer coated 7-inch string inside that well, it meant that we had to drill more wells to get that same fluid production. So it's not just an easy, like, okay, well, we'll just run polymer tubing. No, that had an enormous subsurface well design impact. So that's meant we spent months then re-reservoir modeling the field to see what was the optimal spacing and configuration once we were running that 7-inch tubing. We hope that over time that we will be able to use corrosion mitigation strategies and chemicals, but for this point in time, it was taking on too much project risk to go that route.
There's a couple also on wellbore integrity. A couple of identical questions actually about long-term thermal cycling and your horizontals and, you know, without having casing on them. What do you say about that?
We've done enormous amount of testing. We know what the sandstone, its ability, its compressibility, its resistance, its strength. We're very, very confident that we can keep that open hole. Of course, there's always mitigation strategies around that if we need to re-enter that well at some later date. That's the beauty of having that open hole configuration. So we're very confident that this field design will support itself and produce for the 25 to 30 years that we've modeled. I say we've done enormous enormous amounts of modeling, and I should also mention that we're presently geothermics. Of course, everyone knows geothermics is reviewing all of our subsurface reservoir modeling work, and we'll of course provide any insight or suggestions along the way. So we're not doing this blindly. We're very fortunate that there's an enormous geothermal industry right south of the border from us that we can rely on that experience and expertise to help make the right decisions in this project. Awesome.
A bunch of questions coming in about your brine. So I'll group them into a multi-part question. Your brine is heavy, but does it freeze? Is there a possibility for mineral co-production that you're seeing? And, are you having any specific difficulties or challenges because your brine is so heavy?
I'm not sure on the freezing question, because we're using organic rankine cycle technology to produce the power. So we're going to be producing at 120 degrees Celsius. The injection side, the cold side, is at 65 degrees Celsius. Okay, so it's never going to be exposed to the atmosphere, or it's never going to be in any ponds. That's the last thing we want. This is agricultural farmland. So the last thing we would want is be having any of this exposed anywhere. So it would freeze it I don't think that's not the point. It's interesting though, when we take a beaker of this brine and you put it on the counter in the core lab at about 20 degrees, so about ambient temperature, that's when we start to see these particles starting to precipitate out. You can actually watch the crystallization happen as the brine cools down. So we don't want to get it much colder than 65 degrees Celsius, because that's where we're going to start having some issues. Co-production of minerals, very interesting question. Yes, we do have some goodies in our brine. None of it we believe would be economic on a standalone basis, but once you're producing at 1,000 liters per second, the concept of having a slipstream, a side stream of production of something is a valid economic question. We do have lithium. We've partnered with a Saskatchewan technology developer called Prairie Lithium. Feel free to Google them. They've been working very, very hard at specific lithium extraction technology that can be used in these sedimentary resources. They were successful in producing all of the lithium that was in our brine. So again, at the concentrations of lithium that we have in our brine, we would never economically pursue that on its own. But of course, we're going to look at that very carefully as we're in full construction and having a slipstream to the side to produce lithium.
Awesome. There are quite a few questions about stimulation and fracturing. If you used it, should you have used it? Will you use it in the future? If you didn't use it, why? If you did use it, why? So let's just group them all into one question.
So the horizontal well that we drilled, we did stimulate. So we fracked that well. I'm forgetting the parameters of it. I believe it was a 20-stage stimulation. And so then we had to weigh what we were seeing in open hole test work versus the cased, cemented, perfed production zone. And it did increase our productivity. And in a part of the world in Southeast Saskatchewan, all of these wells are drilled horizontally in the oil and gas industry. All of them are drilled horizontally, and all of them are stimulated. Okay, so this is the part of the world where no one blinks an eye if you are stimulating wells. But the decision for us going forward is to not go that route. This is not a political decision. It's simply we weighed the pros and cons of what we're seeing in the productivity of that stimulated well versus the cost it takes to do that. So it was a real balancing act of, okay, here's the cost and here's the productivity increase versus what we can do just to drill additional wells open hole. And so the decision going forward is a reservoir driven and economic decision to not stimulate the wells, just to drill them open hole, but by adding a few more, we were able to achieve better productivity rates by drilling a few extra wells and leaving them open hole.
Awesome. There's a couple of just clarification in the presentation. One of them, 35 megawatts, are you talking thermal or electrical? And there's a follow-on question from a different panelist, what are you going to produce? Are you producing electricity? And so there, you mentioned your use of ORCs, but maybe go in a little further in that. Are you considering direct use applications as well? And if not, why not?
So this is 35 megawatts of power generation. So this is electrical. All of the power will be sold into our provincial grid to SaskPower. In the province of Saskatchewan, we have one utility, and under the Crown Corporations Act, we have to sell our power to SaskPower. Now, on the heat side, yes, we can sell heat. And interesting enough, I won't go down rabbit holes on carbon tax, but the way the agreement with our power generation is with SaskPower, they own the carbon credits. But on the thermal side, we own the carbon credits on that. So we are actively pursuing an end user for that thermal heat. I mentioned we're injecting at 65 degrees Celsius. And I mentioned that at 20 degrees Celsius, the brine goes a bit sideways. So we do have some play. So we're looking at, okay, what if we went and took another 10 degrees thermal, reducing the brine temperature from 65 to 55 and using that to an end user. I always say the greenhouse end user, because that's the most obvious one. Now, there are impacts to that. If we were to go that route and have a customer, the reservoir engineering would be affected, right? We're going to have to increase our spacing of our wells because now we're injecting at 55 instead of 65. But that said, we would love to have a customer for this. This is agricultural country. Our province just invested $4 billion into a big irrigation project to help diversify the crop selections that we're able to grow in this province. So the idea of being able to integrate some of that academic study and work and use our greenhouses to do that, supported with clean baseload heat, as well as looking at the private sector and having food production. Food security in Canada, like any other country, is a huge concern and a huge priority. And here we are right in the middle of Canada with the highest average solar concentration, I think, in the country right here. So it's a great place for a greenhouse.
Awesome. So we have many more. We have many more questions than we'll be able to get to. I'm going to grab a couple more in our last few minutes, and then we'll do some closing comments from you, Kirsten. One of them, a trend I'm seeing, is questions about parasitic load, how that might change, what it is now, how it might change over time as you get scale in the subsurface, etc. What do you think about that operationally over time, and do you have a parasitic load problem now?
So this is a massive water moving project. There's huge parasitic loads. That's just the reality. Approximately 50% of our power will be consumed running these enormous electric submersible pumps, as well as the cooling towers on the ORC facility. So we're actively looking at options for powering our parasitic loads using alternate energy sources. We looked at wind and solar backed up with battery storage, and it's just not economically feasible. So we're currently looking at natural gas generation with carbon capture. I don't know if you remember back in my slide there's a sandstone unit that is separate from our main sandstone unit that we're going to be producing our geothermal power from. That sandstone unit could be perfectly ideal for carbon capture and storage in that sandstone. So we're looking at this. We haven't made any concrete decisions on that, but here we are in the heart of oil and gas country with a surplus of gas supply, looking at the idea of integrating the system, geothermal with natural gas generation running the pumps, with carbon capture and storage, I think is a pretty awesome integrated system. And this is where these two worlds can come together and support these new projects. One of my colleagues uses the term, says, by integrating the natural gas generation, it's kind of like putting training wheels on geothermal, because we know these projects are hard.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into maybe the last audience question we'll have time for, which is, there are a couple that asked, these are folks within oil and gas entities or within the industry who are wanting to start a startup, and they are asking for your comments on how you did it. What would you say to folks that are interested in doing this themselves about getting started and getting off the ground? For instance, how did you raise your money?
Well, I think the number one is location. I get teased for being such a promoter of the province of Saskatchewan, but starting off in a sector where you have provincial support or statewide support, I think that's really key. Saskatchewan has a long history. We're global leaders in uranium mining. We're global leaders in potash mining, long history in oil and gas. So from a regulatory standpoint, and I think from a community perspective, everything that we were doing was very much in line with the culture of developing these big projects. It was very, when you talk about drilling deep wells and producing fluids at enormous rates, the oil and gas guys are like, yeah, I know how to do that. Gotcha. So there wasn't a big education curve. Even when it came to getting our geothermal lease, we have 100,000 hectare geothermal lease, which, by the way, can also be used for that carbon CO2 storage. It's an enormous block of contiguous geothermal space and carbon storage potential space. And the fact that we could work with our government and they would support that and make it easy for us, I think that's key. So that would be my tip, is to look at sectors and areas where the door is open and where you've got government that is willing to break down barriers versus put them up.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Kirsten. All right. So we're down to about a minute, 2 minutes. Give us your closing thoughts on where you're headed. What's the rest of this project look like over the coming year or two, and then what are you up to after this one?
So we're in the process of tying up a final engineering work over the next few months here. We have some additional 3D seismic we need to shoot. We have a few more, we call it the below ground engineering and above ground, the pots and pans above engineering work that we need to complete with Vena engineering out of Calgary. We're very, very close to the finish line, in which next year we'll be launching into the full construction financing for this facility. So from a timeline perspective, those are really key milestones for us. We're working through the integration of this facility. I think stay tuned. I'm very, very welcome to receiving any feedback. We're pretty proud and pretty excited that we believe the first geothermal company in the world to pursue an integrated design with natural gas and carbon capture. And I think that putting those two pieces together, I think, could be transformative in this geothermal sector globally.
Awesome. All right, Kirsten. Super cool. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing your presentation. For the audience and all of these, Kirsten, if you're willing to jump into the audience and address some of these questions one-on-one with folks, that would be awesome. Otherwise, you all know Kirsten's company and website, so please do reach out to them for some of these questions. There's a lot of audience engagement on this one, and you are well loved, Kirsten. So thanks very much for coming and talking about your project. So we'll be back in 5 minutes with the next startup. Thanks, Kirsten, so much.
Thanks, everyone.